Hello, I'm Dango Rose. Welcome to the Mountaineer Podcast, where everybody's listening. The Mountaineer brings you the latest news of the Peak to Peak region, in print, online, through our podcast, social media, and special publications. Now, listen in to the latest news of the area with our local journalists.
The song that you are currently listening to is called Promise, and it is by Chaz Chambers featuring vocals from Yami Cabrera, the duo behind Havana Music Tours and Musical Getaways. If you want to learn more about Cuba's musical connection to the Americas, then be sure to attend an awesome presentation that Chaz and Yami are hosting at the Nederland Community Library on Thursday, September 19th. More details to come later in the podcast. In the meantime, be sure to check out more of Chaz's music, including his latest album, Coastal, wherever you get your music. Hello there, everybody. My name is Jamie Lammers, and welcome back to the Mountaineer Podcast, where for this Wednesday's episode, as I mentioned previously, we will not be doing a retrospective episode this time around. I have a feeling that we still have some retrospective episodes that will be coming out in the future. There's one closer to October that I definitely have planned, but for the next week or two, I'm going to focus on other things, other more current events as well, so that I have a little more time to figure out what I still have left for the retrospective episodes. But don't worry, you guys are still getting Wednesday episodes for a bit. I'm also going to mention that life is completely chaotic for me at the moment. I am starting an incredibly busy new routine in my life in the background. I have essentially been driving around non-stop for the last couple of days, and I still have a lot of editing to do for Friday's podcast, which I am very excited is able to come together, but is going to take a lot of work in the meantime. To put it in perspective how much work I'm going to have to do in the next couple of days to make sure Friday's episode is ready at least somewhat on schedule, the two unedited interviews that I have for this upcoming Friday's podcast are combined an hour and a half long. So it looks like I'm gonna have a lot of work to do in the next couple of days if I'm gonna get that out on time. That being said, I am very excited for the final product to come out on Friday. In fact, I'm very excited for the next set of interviews that I have lined up for the next week and a half. We've got a lot of awesome material in the next week and a half, and I cannot wait for all of it to come out. In fact, I can confidently say that this episode is the start of that series of interviews that I'm going to release over the next week and a half that I'm very excited about. I'm very happy that I managed to get this interview together, even though it was a bit last minute. By the way, that was no fault of the guests today. Thankfully, though, it's pulled together here for the podcast, and I'm very happy about that. So, our two guests for this week, do you mind introducing yourselves real quick?
Yeah, so my name is Chaz Chambers, and I own a company called Musical Getaways, LLC, and Havana Music Tours. First started with Havana Music Tours, but I'm a drummer. I've been playing drums since I was about 5 years old, and I started the tourism company with Cuba, Havana Music Tours, about 7.5 years ago, and I met my wife in Cuba, so that's the basics of that, and then Yami can introduce herself.
Well, my name is Yami Cabrera. Yami is the shorter way. I'm a Cuban musicologist. I studied music since I was 7 years old. I graduated from college, the musicologist bachelor, and then then I started working in Cuban institutions like the Cuban Music Research Institution and the Music Institution too. So I specialize in anything about Cuban music. I started working with Chaz, with the company Havana Music Tours too. And now we both work with Havana Music Tours and Musical Getaways as the basis.
So I hear that as a husband and wife duo, as a duo of musicologists, and as the duo behind Havana Music Tours and Musical Getaways, you two are hosting a presentation at the Nederland Community Library very soon.
Yep, on the 19th, almost a week from now. But yeah, it's, I guess, kind of random that, we live here in Ned, so that's why, but yeah, we're hoping to bring a little bit of, Netherlands has a lot of cool musical history too, so a lot of the music that was played and recorded here in the famous Caribou studio, a lot of that was influenced by the history of music that's tied to Cuba. So we're excited to share some insights that maybe people have never heard about before, maybe some history that they don't know about, but there's a deep connection between jazz music in New Orleans and Cuba, and how Cuba influenced a lot of things, and Latin culture influenced even things like hip hop in the Bronx and things like that. So we're going to talk about how our countries have always been connected, not only with music, but with trade, even under Spanish colonialism. Just to kind of touch on a couple things, I don't want to give away the presentation, but try to connect the dots, show a little bit of why Cuba is important and why they hold the key to American music.
By the way, this is another PSA to anybody out there who is somehow connected to Caribou Ranch. If you have any information that you want to share about it, please contact me at media@themountaineer.com. I want to hear your story and get it on the podcast. Anyway, as Chaz just mentioned, he doesn't want to give away the big points of the presentation because he wants to save the excitement for September 19th at the Nederland Community Library. So this interview is going to focus more on the background of Chaz and Yami and not on Cuban music history as a whole. As interesting as I think that would have been, it's the subject of their presentation, and I didn't want to spoil it, much like they didn't. I assume that you two host events like this a lot.
Yeah, we're a remote-based company. Technically, the company is still based in Florida. We haven't moved it to Colorado, but we live here in Colorado, and we are the owners and directors of the company. But most of our team is outside of the country. We have a master musicologist living in Spain who operates tours in Spain for us. We have part of our team in Brazil, in Colombia, and in Cuba, and all those places we do tours. It all started with Cuba, but then right before the pandemic, 2019, we started to expand to Brazil and Colombia and Spain. So we operate our team remotely, but we're all musicians, either musicologists or music teachers or just working musicians, performance musicians. So yeah, we do between 20 and 30 tours a year in Cuba at the moment. And then total, we maybe do between 30 to 40 tours around the world per year. These are usually group tours up to 12 people, small group tours that are music themed, but also just generalized cultural tours led by musicians and local experts. So sometimes we tie in local religion, indigenous cultures, food culture. We try to check all the boxes for travel, but we try to keep a music theme. Like a lot of times we'll tie to a music festival like the Havana Jazz Festival or like the Petronio Alvarez Festival, which is one of the biggest Afro-Latino music festivals in Colombia and in Latin America. We're official partners of the La Rioja Wine and Music Festival in Spain. So we're the main operator for them. And so we try to sometimes not only just connect with festivals, but just do different themes that cover different styles like jazz, or for New Orleans, we do like a New Orleans music tour. And we do like a Andalusian flamenco tour in Spain, which takes you through a deep dive of where flamenco music came from in Spain. And that's with our master musicologist tour guide, Rocio, who's living in Spain. So yeah, that's the basics of what we do. Musical Getaways is the brand that does all around the world, but Havana Music Tours is how we started, and that's strictly about Cuba. Cuba's still the main thing we do. That's probably 70% of our work is with Cuba.
And with both of your backgrounds in music and musicology, how did you end up building up and starting Havana Music Tours in the first place?
Well, there's a little bit of, before I met Yami, because we met in Cuba, I'll tell a little bit of that story, but I started with me, I was playing drums for the circus, Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus. So I was one of the last drummers to play with the circus before they shut down, and then they came back, but they came back without musicians. So I was one of the last musicians to play with the circus. Around the time that Obama had opened up travel to Cuba, I was on a break from the tour, and I booked a flight and went to study in Cuba. I went to study mostly Afro-Cuban percussion, because as a drummer, I've always been interested in percussion. But I found it very complex to navigate the U.S. licensing. So you can't just freely travel from the United States to Cuba right now. You have to fulfill a travel license, which is from the Treasury Department. They're called OFAC. And so they limit travel travel because Cuba's still a sanctioned country. They still have an embargo. And so now Obama made that much easier, opened up commercial flights, things like that, which still exist to this day. But I traveled there. I studied there. It blew my mind. It changed my world. The warmth of Cuban people, the music, all of it. And then I came up with the idea of Havana Music Tours. And I honestly wasn't that serious about it at first because I was still on tour with the circus and I had my job. But I was at least serious enough to come home as soon as my plane landed, actually. I bought the domain HavanaMusicTours.com, which surprisingly was available. And then it was crazy. Like 3 days later, they pulled us into a conference room and said they were shutting down the circus. And so at first I still didn't think about it, but then a couple months went by. We were playing the last 3 or 4 months of the show. And then I moved to Nashville for a second for like 3 or 4 months to try to work as a drummer. And at the same time, I was like, oh, well, maybe I'll develop this idea. And so I started building the website. I traveled back to Cuba, started creating more connections between musicians I knew. And it wasn't until maybe a year after that, maybe 8, 9 months after that, I met Yami. And so Yami started as a friend. We started talking about music. We were introduced by our drum teacher. My drum teacher's wife is her best friend. And so we met that way. And we didn't speak each other's language. She didn't speak any English. I didn't speak any Spanish. We learned each other's language. We started dating. We got engaged. We got married in Havana. And this was right before the pandemic. We got married. So we've been married almost 5 years now. But we went through the whole process together. She immigrated. But like when Yami came on board, she brought what I think was kind of missing was the academic musicology perspective. So we ended up opening up our doors to more people on our team who are musicologists and professional musicians and gave a little bit more validity to what I was trying to do. And we always had local guys and local musicians and stuff. But when we got the musicology background with Yami, we were able to expand a little bit and be more educational. Like right now, we're working with major universities in the United States to try to bring students to Cuba. And we're doing that in an academic way. That's the basics.
Yami, do you have your own perspective that you want to add to that story?
Well, it was a very interesting point in my life because I was always interested in how tourists could help visualize and bring alive some specific groups and maybe specific music genres in Cuba that were kind of not dying but hidden, were missing some place in Cuban culture. And it was very interesting to me to start working with Havana Music Tours and bringing this specific music. I mean, many cultural travel agencies that work and bring groups of tourists to Cuba, they mostly touch like the very basic things of Cuban music. So I knew that Chaz was very interested in the deep connections and the deep music scene in Cuba. So it was very important to me to help bring all this hidden music to what we were doing and embrace Cuban culture in general, not just the most touristic part of it. And of course, with my musicology background, and not only mine, but the other people that are working with us now and I brought on board at that point, it was very interesting how we integrate all that to our tour. So yeah, that's pretty much.
And Yami brought a lot of the people who work for us now onto our team. So back in like 2018, 2019, we were headed in a bigger direction before the pandemic. And we are in that area, but people like Miguel, who lives in Mexico, and he's finishing his master's in choral direction. He's coming back to work with us after he graduates. Rocio, who I mentioned, who does Spain tours. For a while when she was studying her master's, she wasn't working with us, but she did for years before. And she came back and worked with us. Now she's basically like my assistant general manager. And for like Jazz Plaza, for example, we all fly in. But Yami's responsible for bringing together most of our Cuba team and being connected with all these musicians and whatnot. Even actually one of her former students is one of our main tour leaders on the ground in Cuba. Her name is Ismaili, and she's an elementary music school teacher. But she's absolutely phenomenal. If you want some resource on how our clients feel about her and things, we have all 5-star reviews on TripAdvisor. You can just Google Havana Music Tours TripAdvisor, and just you can go through and see some of the quotations and some of the information that people have shared about our tours and what they thought about it and things like that.
For some reason, I could have sworn I heard that this Miguel went to CU as well for a music composition degree. So my brain connected that I knew this particular Miguel. So I asked him if it was, in fact, this particular Miguel.
No, Miguel is just living in Mexico. He's just a really, really good guy who actually sang with like one of the modern versions of the Buena Vista Social Club in Cuba, the one that's existing right now, a couple original members, touring members at least. But he's a great singer, but he's one of our tour leaders. He's actually going to start working on tours in Mexico and also doing some of our tours in Colombia. But he also flies into Cuba to do tours when we can't go.
Oh, well, it was worth asking anyway. Shout out to Miguel from Havana Music Tours. And also a shout out to Miguel Ortega, who did serve as a choir instructor of mine for a semester or so. Anyway, back to you two. Chaz, where did you grow up again?
I was born and raised in Atlanta, so I studied drum performance at Atlanta Institute of Music, and almost all of my life and my career was built from Atlanta. And I played drums on cruise ships for a couple of years, toured around. I lived in Colorado a couple times, but we just kind of found a home here. So we're both far from home, but we just love the mountains. We love the atmosphere out here. And also the community of Nederland is really cool. It's really unique. So as musicians, we feel right at home in Ned. But yeah, we're both far from our original locations.
And when did you two make the move to Ned?
It's been a little over a year since we've lived in Ned, but before that we lived down in Denver and Wheat Ridge. And then years ago before that, before I had started the Cuba tour company and went on tour of the circus, I lived in Denver, like downtown Denver, back in like 2014 or something like that. It was actually our third time living out here, but we actually lived, before we moved to Ned permanently, we had been living as digital nomads in a travel trailer all around the Rockies and also through Utah and stuff. So we did that for almost 2 years. Got a little bit tiring, but we did that in between doing our tours. So we would actually come out here all summer for a couple years, and then we would go to our family's house in Florida.
For the record, when I conducted this interview, I was at a public building and couldn't get any service there. So I ended up going to my car in the parking garage, and the service worked perfectly, except for right here where Chaz ended up cutting out for about 5 seconds. I think here he talked about staying in a trailer somewhere in the country before heading to Cuba, but I'm not entirely sure, to be completely honest. Sorry about that cutout.
Trailer and fly to Cuba. And sometimes we stay in Cuba for multiple months operating the tours and stuff. These days we have a big enough team where we don't actually do a lot of the tours ourselves anymore. We have a really great team who does most of our tours. Now I'll fly in for specialty tours, like huge tours and universities and stuff like that. And then the Havana Jazz Festival, which we have almost 60 people confirmed for that. But yeah.
And Yami, I'm curious, what's your musical background? Have you spent most of your time dedicated to musicology, or have you spent time performing as well?
So in Cuba, we are very proud of having a very well-built music educational system. So I started when I was 7 years old, which was the elementary music school. So it was like 7 years of that. I was doing piano as my bass, as my main instrument. And then I went to the second level education in Cuba, which is the kind of like high school. And I was more focused in music theory part and music education. I still was playing piano and singing in choirs and doing all the performance part, because in Cuba we kind of do everything. Even if we focus in the more theoretical aspect of music, we try to keep the performance part as well. And then I went to the art university, the only one we have in Cuba, to study my bachelor in musicology. So yeah, I kept the performance part with the piano. I was singing too, but my focus was mostly Cuban history and research about Cuba music. I wrote a few articles about it, things like that. Most like the theory part, but I also teach in a couple of music conservatories in Havana, Cuba. So I kind of like this all of it during my career on my educational time in Cuba.
And with your backgrounds in both music performance and musicology, how have you two been able to use that experience to utilize what you talk about in your events and tours?
Well, that's the thing, because of what we do and the way we project our tours on our website and on our social media and everything. Most of our clients are very interested on the very deep aspect of Cuban music. Well, not only Cuban music, just music in general, with musical getaways as well. So I think the deep knowledge we have about music is the key of our tours, because our clients are always asking very deep questions, and we have a lot of clients that are like university teachers and very knowledgeable people. So they actually know a lot of things about Cuban music as well. So sometimes they like to know the local knows about Cuban music, but also what we know and our professional part and expert is knowledge of it, I guess.
I think it also makes us better curators of itineraries and experiences, because as musicians and educated musicians as well, we have our own ears and our own perspective and our own critiques and understanding of what we think and what a lot of other musicians think is some of the best music. So we look at a festival that has a lot of things going on, we're able to simplify it for the clients and be like, we got to go to this concert that night, we got to go to this concert the next night. And we kind of pick that stuff out. Because the Havana Jazz Festival, for example, is just always really crazy. There's like 4 or 5 different things going on at one time. And so we help simplify that. We're like, we don't want you to waste your time going to see this when this theater is better and you got this artist playing and then they have a featured drummer who's the best drummer or whatever, just for an example. So we bring that to the table when we're creating the experiences. And we're also just really connected with a lot of great musicians as well. It's not just about us. It's about the community that we're able to connect to. And the famous groups like those Maniquitos de Matanzas, which is one of the most famous Afro-Cuban rumba groups in Cuba. They won Latin Grammy. We know all these people and we're able to really connect and create unique experiences where people can meet them and study with them. And we do a unique experience, for example, in Matanzas with a drummer who is kind of like the manager of Los Maniquitos de Matanzas, where we go up on top of a mountaintop and we overlook the city and he's able to point out different sections of the city and what rhythms were really developed there in combination with the Africans that came through the port during the colonial time as slaves. And so he's able to actually point out what these rhythms were and how they influenced styles that we know like danzón or cha-cha-cha or rumba. And so we're able to just identify that, know that, and pick that out and create that. Whereas if you were to go on maybe any other tour where they're like, oh, there's a salsa show tonight, you should go to it, but they can't tell you anything about it. Like, what time signature is that? Or what was that keyboard player playing? It sounded kind of weird. And we can talk about that. We can discuss that in detail because we know what's happening.
Yeah, so actually I was talking to our team a second ago about this specific part because we were talking about how Brazil and Cuba are these type of places that you can find music everywhere. But the difference between what we do and what other people do is that, in Cuba, for example, we have many clients that say, oh yeah, we can go to all Havana. Havana is the most popular touristic area in Havana, and you can find music in every corner. You can go there and spend the whole day and you're going to see probably 10 different groups playing Cuban music. But you are missing also the special part of other type of Cuban music that are not there. Other parts that, what I was saying, like hidden places that other people don't really know about because of the connections we have with musicians. We know that someone very important is playing this night and we're going to take you there, not just to go see the typical things that other people are going to see in all Havana. So yeah, that's really unique thing we do.
Is there anything that you hope people will take away from either the presentation next week or from Havana music tours if they decide to sign up?
Well, I'm hoping that we can just create a better connection and community next week with the presentation at the Ned Library. But I can say for sure that on our tours, we've had people twice my age, people in their 70s and stuff, break down in tears from being overwhelmed with the cultural immersion. And of course, it happens through music, but it's just all of it, conversations with people, sitting down at dinner and late night music and all these things and seeing another place and being immersed in another culture that's very different from our first world perspective here in the United States. And just changing lives and creating community is the goal that we've always set out to do. And we're always trying to create bridges through music because whether or not you speak someone's language, a lot of times you can understand feeling and projection and what I like to call soul through someone's expression in music. You don't have to speak Spanish or you don't have to speak Portuguese or anything to really appreciate all the notes and rhythms and singing that's coming at you. You can feel what they're trying to say without knowing the lyrics or without understanding the lyrics. And so I think we're able to, in a very divided world we live in right now with this election coming up and politics and so many people being divided and fighting, at the end of the day, I think a lot of us can find refuge in music. And that's the whole goal of what we do. We're trying to connect people through music to different countries, to different cultures. And with Cuba specifically, because our countries have been so disconnected for over 60 years through a brutal embargo from the United States. And though our governments don't really connect well and they disagree on a lot of things, we still find that people want to connect with other people. And so we try to just create that bridge. And usually it works. You do get a small percentage of people who just don't get it. But most people, we have people who have WhatsApp groups and they continue to talk in them. We have one really, really enthusiastic group that's always like, oh, let's go to Africa together. Let's go talking about stuff going on in New Orleans. It was a group that went to Cuba together and they all wanted to keep in touch. They all became friends, That's not something that we could create. That's something that just organically happened through a bunch of people that have mutual interests. And so that keeps us going. When I have someone who's like 70 years old with tears in front of me telling me that we changed their life through the experiences that we were able to provide, that right there is like, it's not so much about business anymore. It's not about capitalism. It's about connection. It's about community and it's about creating bridges. So that's what I always hope that people take away, whether we're giving a presentation or whether we're giving a tour or whether we're giving an interview like this. So whatever you write, I hope that that's some sort of display in what we're talking about and what we're doing.
And Yami, is there anything else you want to add to what what Chaz just talked about?
Well, I think Chaz covered it pretty well, actually. Yeah, that's well, for me, in the case of Cuba, is showing my culture in the best way I can and connect, and also give the opportunity to people in Cuba to connect with people from other countries and talk about their experience, because some people in Cuba sometimes are a little isolated from what the world, how the world works. So that connection is also important, not only for the people we bring to Cuba, but also for the people in Cuba. So yeah, that connection is the main thing for us.
Is there anything else you want to add or promote before we start to sign off?
I don't know. I mean, of course, we want to get more people to come out to the presentation. So anybody who's interested in music, you don't have to be interested in Cuban music. But if you're anything from jazz to rock to hip hop to folkloric styles that happen in the United States, and you're interested in that history, then this is definitely a presentation for you, because there are some important dots that need to be connected from what happened between the United States and Cuba that helped develop American music. A lot of it through New Orleans, but some of it through hip hop and other urban styles. So yeah, I would say that anybody who just wants to, it's not very expensive. It's only $10, but it's unique. It's different. We're bringing it right to the front door of everybody here in the Nederland community. And I know there's a lot of music lovers here. I think I even saw on your page that you're even a musician. So I think that if anybody's interested, I think it's a cool thing to see. We don't have to drive to Boulder or Denver or anything like that. So it's unique in that sense. So I hope everybody will come out. There'll be some Cuban mocktails, and I'm also going to demonstrate some different Cuban rhythms and have a little interaction between the crowd to understand a little bit more about the music. We're also going to play some important music and give some important references for people who want to study more important books and important other musicologists and things like that to reference.
There was one more thing I wanted to talk about with you in particular, Chaz. You have music releases of your own out there, don't you?
I do. I guess you can type in Chaz Chambers on all the streaming platforms. I have 3 main releases, an album and 2 EPs. Very different than what we do with Latin music and stuff. I mean, it's kind of good for mountain music, I guess. It's like ambient, orchestral, folkloric, alt-folk kind of thing. I have hybrid some world music into some of the songs. And also like my album Coastal, the main album that I released, I kind of wrote some parts before the pandemic, but I finished it up in the pandemic. But some of that was recorded in Cuba, some of it in Trinidad, Cuba, some of it in Havana, and a couple different studios with some really good Cuban musicians, Cuban singers, Cuban horn players, though it's still in the style of ambient, orchestral, post-rock kind of maybe. It's just a fusion of that sort of thing, alternative, I guess. But yeah, I've released quite a few things, still working on some new things, but yeah, it's more for fun. I did recently have, not the music that I've written that you could find, but I did recently have a collaboration, a co-write in a Netflix movie called The Neon Highway, where I was a co-writer, but I mostly just performed drums on a couple background tunes on that movie. So I've had a couple of successes with that, but it's more for just the art of it, just to display it and show what I'm feeling and what I'm thinking. Maybe the new stuff will be a little bit more influenced by Brazil. I have a deep love for like samba music and Brazilian percussion. So, but yeah, it's true. If you want to search for that, you can just type it in on Spotify or Apple Music or YouTube. There's actually quite a few videos on my YouTube channel, live videos. Actually, Yami's singing in one. I forgot about that. I hired a couple musician friends and we went into a studio in Denver and we played a couple of my original tunes, and Yami is singing and I'm playing drums and also singing. And we did just a live session with just a few musicians. So when you listen to the album, there's a lot of layers, a lot of musicians, a lot of orchestral stuff, but we did it with just like 5 of us in the studio earlier this year, actually. I haven't really promoted it that much, but you can check that out on YouTube. YouTube's probably the best way to visualize everything. It's very different from my tour company and what I'm doing. But that's just me. That's just me as a musician and as an artist.
Yami, do you have any music out there?
Not really. You can maybe find articles I wrote and things like that, but no music. Maybe I collaborate with Chaz and a few things that...
Yeah, she recorded on the album too, some vocals and then some newer stuff. She's recorded vocals on, but yeah, we probably should play together more. We talked about doing like a show at the train cars or something. We'll see. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
She's actually pregnant right now. Our baby's doing could be in a month, So it's kind of paused everything as far as that goes, but...
Yeah.
Congratulations to both of you, by the way. At this point, I started wrapping things up and talking to Chaz and Yami about the logistics of this interview and how it would be released through the Mountain Ear. I like using music from the artists that I interview in each episode of the podcast. So I asked Chaz if there were any songs from his catalog that he would recommend putting as an intro or an outro to the podcast. And he talked with Yami about it for a second.
Real? Well, I mean, yeah, that has more of a folkloric vibe, but that's with an a cappella group that actually Yami wrote her thesis about. It's a really important group in Trinidad, Cuba. The last song on my album, Coastal, is a song called Rio, which is like kind of a Spanish slightly Spanglish version of Down to the River to Pray, the old, I guess it's technically a slave song, and it was kind of made famous by Alison Krauss from the Oh Brother Where Art Thou. So we did a Spanish version of that with orchestral arrangement, like a cello player and Roomba percussion. Very interesting. If you know what song I'm talking about, you could use that. That could be relevant to not only mountain folkloric styles, but Cuban folklore, and then also showcases everything in one thing. I don't know if it's too ambient sounding or too orchestral, but that's a recommendation. You can use whatever you want, though.
I just thought that was a really cool story and wanted to include that. Thank you so much to Chaz and Yami for coming on board and joining us for the podcast this Wednesday. If you want to learn more about Havana Music Tours and how you can sign up for future events, then be sure to head to HavanaMusicTours.com. You can also check out videos from Havana Music Tour's official YouTube channel on that website. Also be sure to check out more information about musical getaways. I want to make a very clear clarification because as I was researching to find the right website, I found that there was another group called Music Getaways, LLC, that was sued and ultimately filed for bankruptcy. I want to make it very clear, this is a completely different company. This is Musical Getaways, not Music Getaways. The two have absolutely no connection, and you can still learn more about Musical Getaways by going to musicalgetaways.com. You can also learn more about Chaz and Yami as individuals by going to chazchambers.com or to yamicabrera.com. Chaz Chambers also has a YouTube channel, as he mentioned earlier. You can also check out Chaz's music, which includes his debut single Stay, his larger project Color World /Apathia, his latest album Coastal, and his latest two singles Memories of Distance and Promise, wherever you get your music. Chaz personally prefers if you go on Tidal to stream his music because not only is the audio quality better, but the royalties that the artist receives are higher than other streaming services. However, you can stream it wherever you like. And finally, if you want to hear more about Cuban music in general and its connections to North America, and if you want to see Chaz and Yami present, then you can head to the Nederland Community Library, located at 200 Highway 72 North in Nederland, on Thursday, September 19th, starting at 6:30 for their presentation, Music of the Americas, Why Cuba Holds the Key. Registration for the event is required, so go online to nederland.colibraries.org, find the event page for Music of the Americas, Why Cuba Holds the Key, and there you will see two separate links. One to register for the Cuba Music Program presentation, and one to pay a $10 registration fee so that you can attend that presentation. Once you've done both of those things, then you can head over to the library on Thursday, September 19th, enjoy some mocktail mojitos and light Cuban refreshments, and hopefully learn something awesome about Cuban music. Thank you so much to everybody who tuned in to this week's Wednesday edition of the Mountaineer Podcast. Be sure to come back on Friday for our regularly scheduled Music of the Mountains episode, where to be and what to see. I am very excited to bring you two interviews for an upcoming show, one of which goes very in-depth into a very storied musical career. I cannot wait to bring that interview to you guys, even if it's going to take a lot of work to edit. In the meantime, if you want to share any of these episodes around with whoever you see fit, then be sure to head to the mtnearpodcast.buzzsprout.com or to the mtnear.com/the-mountain-ear-podcast and share whichever episodes you like with whoever. And if you want to be involved in the podcast in any way, shape, or form, if you're involved in the Peak to Peak area and you want to be interviewed or you have advertising that you want to get out in the podcast, then be sure to email me at media@themountaineer.com and we will get something sorted for you. All right, guys, see you on Friday. Have a great rest of your day.
Y mientras bajo el río orar, estudiando sobre el reino de amor de nuestro gran Dios celestial. Oh, hermanas, let's go down, come on down. Oh, hermanas, let's go down. Vamos al río
The song that you are currently listening to is called Rio, and it is the final track on Chaz Chambers' latest album, Coastal, which you can stream along with his other musical releases wherever you get your music. You can also learn more about Cuba's musical connection to the Americas by heading to Chaz's presentation with his wife Yami Cabrera, who both created Havana music tours and musical getaways, at the Nederland Community Library on Thursday, September 19th. Be sure to register now if you want to head to that event yourself.
Bajo el río ahora, estudiando sobre el reino de amor de nuestro gran Dios celestial. Oh, padres, let's go down, come on down. Oh, padres, let's go down, vamos al río ahora. Mientras bajo al río ahora, estudiando sobre el reino de amor de nuestro gran Dios celestial.
And that's it for our show. Subscribe online to get more access to more news, weekly updates to our community calendar, and a link to our YouTube channel by visiting themountaineer.com. Be sure to use the coupon code PODCAST when subscribing for a 10% discount, only available to our listeners. If you are in the local Peak-to-Peak area, be sure to pick up a print edition of The Mountaineer at a local business. I'm Dango Rose. Thank you for listening.